was a little more than a week ago, we heard the shocking story of a CIA whistleblower who is now a man without a country. He has been effectively exiled in the country of New Zealand and kept from his wife in Canada. I'm talking, of course, about Harmon Wilfred and his wife Carolyn. They're with me today. Harmon and Carolyn, how are you two?
Pretty good, hanging in there.
You're good. Yeah, hanging in there is a good way of putting it.
Now, as the members of the crowdsourced community may or may not know, we've been in contact since the initial interview on Sunday with Charles. And you guys have been revealing to me some really stunning information about your overall situation. And I want to remind the viewers of Crowdsource the Truth, if they're watching right now, we're live at this moment. You're watching on Periscope, you're watching on Facebook. Of course, this interview will be posted after we're complete on YouTube, but until the ban on live streaming is lifted from YouTube, we are on periscope.tv/CS The Truth, and I hope that people will tune in there. You guys have shared with me some letters that you've written over the years, and I want to read those to the listening audience. But before we do that, just fill us in roughly on what's been going on. Has there been any progress? I would say it's doubtful since the short time since we last spoke, but just let everyone know where you each are right now and what the essential issue is.
Well, since the Sunday with Charles interview, and God bless all of you for that one, I have sent that interview out to members of New Zealand Parliament, all the members of New Zealand media. I've sent it out globally as well to the global media in the US, Canada, Europe, some places in Africa and in Australasia. And so far I have received no response.
Wow. Well, and certainly that's not new to you guys. You've been through this for almost 20 years. Harmon, anything on your end?
Well, I am in New Zealand. You suggested I'm an alien in New Zealand. I'm a stateless person. New Zealand refuses to recognize any of my rights here, and that's very disappointing since I've been here, and Carolyn and I've been here together and done business for many years. She's now been separated from me for 2.5 years. Well, 2 years and 5 months, going on 2 years and 6 months pretty quickly. And we're really working hard right now with the New Zealand government to help them to understand that what they're doing is wrong. We haven't done anything to deserve this. We really believe that the U.S. And the Clintons still in there are affecting things in this government such that they're trying to get me out of this country. But of course, I can't leave. I can't go anywhere because I'm stateless. I don't have any documents to leave. But they're still trying to bully me into leaving and sort of going out into never land, you know, to unlawfully enter another country. And I'm refusing to do that. Unfortunately, when Carolyn left for her visit with her daughter in September 2015, they barred her from returning, even though she has a Canadian visa waiver, you know, for visitors, which is a contract between the two countries, which is normal. She hasn't done anything wrong to deserve that, but they've made it very clear they want me out of the country. A friend of mine has said it's as though she's the tethered goat and I'm the lion, you know, that they're trying to lure me out of the country. And I think for very nefarious reasons, quite frankly, but that's what I believed all along, and I think that can be shown to be true with the evidence that we have.
I've applied for 2 visitors visas, and they're even refusing me to visit my husband. I'm not even allowed to visit.
I'm surprised that a Canadian person would need a visa to go to New Zealand.
You don't.
Well, you wouldn't ordinarily, because the visa waiver agreement, as I mentioned, between the two countries, which is normal, would allow her to come in without having to have a visa. But they basically canceled that on her, so that she would have to apply for a visa, and then they've turned her down twice, even on a humanitarian basis.
It really seems like unprecedented efforts that the government is taking against you personally to really, I mean, this is as if I went to Canada and they said, "Where's your visa, Mr. Goodman?" And I was like, "I don't
Yeah.
have a visa to get into Canada." Or if you go to like Massachusetts and they're asking for your passport, you're supposed to just be able to go to these countries freely.
Well, it's funny
Let's face
because
it, this is, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
the New Zealand government has a huge program against bullying, and yet they are bullies, and they are not setting a good example for the public, for the people.
I mean, let's face it. This is not North Korea. You know, she's not trying to enter a third world country. This is supposed to be a civilized country that belongs to the UN and respects human rights.
Supposedly.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Harmon, because we are all in the United States, and I presume in Canada, we are all sort of indoctrinated or programmed or whatever you want to call it to think of countries like North Korea. And I remember when I was a kid, you know, Russia, the Soviet Union, it was really, you know, sold to us that these were horrible countries that engage in atrocious human rights violations. And here we are. We see firsthand a story of a family that's literally been destroyed in what seems to be a personal vendetta against you. And before we get into some of the details and the documents, I want to remind everyone they can follow you on Twitter. And if people aren't following Harmon, you've only got 90 Twitter followers. So I definitely would encourage Crowdsource the Truth community members who are interested in this story, and anyone who is interested in justice and freedom and the truth and anything remotely resembling honesty and integrity, follow Harmon Wilfred. He is at Harmon Tweets on Twitter. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the details of the ordeal that the two of you and the rest of your family have been through in the course of this. And for people who maybe missed the first interview we did with you, Harmon, on Sunday with Charles, just give us a very brief overview of how you came to be involved with the CIA and what essentially you did that gave the government such an issue against you personally.
Well, I'm not sure that can be too brief, but I'll try. I got involved with the CIA after my tour of duty in the U.S. Air Force, where I was a top secret, I had a top secret security clearance in weapons, in aircraft weapons. And years later, and I got out in 1973, so I was in the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam conflict. It was in the 90s that I was contacted by a fellow when I was doing real estate internationally, who ended up revealing to me that he was a former Navy SEAL and a CIA agent, and was interested, because I was in financial things and working with international banks, he was interested in hiring me or bringing me on as an asset to the CIA to help them work some financial deals that they were in the middle of. So, of course, being a loyal person to the country and a patriot, I said, sure, I'd be happy to. But in the end, it turned out to be something incredibly nefarious. Surprise, surprise, with the CIA. They told me it would be humanitarian work that I would be helping to fund in Central America. And as it turned out, it was really a covert bank that the CIA was putting together so that they could do black ops operations without any accountability to anyone, including Congress. When I found that out, long story short, I blew the whistle to the U.S. Justice Department, only to find out that President Clinton was personally involved in this thing, again, nefariously. When I took it to the U.S. Justice Department, I was contacted by Clinton's attorney, who came up to Canada to see me and say, stop it right now. Ultimately, even to the point where I was having some difficulty in a family court thing, and they said, if you continue to do this, you'll never see your children again, which turned out to be unfortunately true. So it was just one thing after another, and ultimately it was the Clintons and their foundation that they were utilizing at the time for laundering the money that I would help to put together for this, quote, CIA bank. And the bank was in the billions of dollars. The first deal that I put together for them that was successful was $6 billion that traded into $15 billion in treasury bills. But when I decided to the whistle, of course, I became public enemy number one. I was picked up in Canada, thrown in prison. I've been in prisons now in Canada and the U.S., numerous places, and more or less is what they call diesel therapy in the in the vernacular of the CIA and the police, where they run you from one place to another in belly chains and handcuffs, just to run you down, drive you crazy, and completely destroy your will. And that didn't work. So ultimately, they were forced to let me go because we got some rather good attorneys through my lovely wife, whose wealthy family. She got her father to fund an attorney who got me out of a federal prison in the U.S., got me back to Canada, and ultimately then we had to leave Canada, literally afraid for my life at that point in time, because we figured the CIA had some other things up their sleeve, and I was warned to get out. We went to Hong Kong together, just like Snowden, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed in Hong Kong for 6 weeks. We were taken care of by covert agents. And then we had to leave there, and we came to New Zealand, and I've been in New Zealand ever since. As I say, Carolyn left New Zealand in September 2015 to visit her daughter and then was prohibited to return. And they're still trying to get me out of New Zealand. Everyone's refusing to give me any status whatsoever. They've left me stateless. And so here I sit stateless, and there Carolyn sits in Canada without me. And we've been fighting like crazy for the last 2.5 years to rejoin with each other, and for me to have contact with my children again, which has been 20 years since I've had any contact with my children. So that's not exactly a long story short, but there's a lot of things.
From a previous marriage,
Yeah.
right? 2 children from a previous marriage.
Previous
and I've
marriages,
noticed in our
that's right.
conversations, Wilfred, Harmon, sorry, you're very careful to not say that you're a Vietnam veteran. You're a Vietnam era veteran.
That's right.
So what is that distinction?
That's right. Well, I volunteered in the Vietnam War, volunteered in the military, which was unusual because a lot of guys were being conscripted back then. But I volunteered. I was fortunate enough in the Air Force to be sent straight to Europe because of my abilities and because I was tested with a lot of things in mathematics and all the other stuff. And so they decided that putting me in weaponry was the best place to go. But ultimately, I worked with just the basic weapons and then ultimately nuclear weapons. But because it was a strategic force in Europe, I was sent straight to Europe. So I was in the UK, which was England at the time, for my tour of duty, which was 4 years, and then I left there and came back to the U.S. After my tour of duty. So I didn't go to Vietnam, but I did volunteer during the Vietnam era. So that's a distinction that needs to be clear. I was not a Vietnam veteran per se. I was not a veteran of that war, but I was there during the Vietnam era.
But from what you're describing to me right now, it sounds very much like you were almost being groomed for a position in intelligence, because you're obviously very intellectual, very intelligent. You've got a knack for finance, mathematics, and you're telling me you worked with nuclear weapons. I would, if I was to guess, I would have to say the CIA basically wanted you and then became pissed off when you weren't doing what they wanted you to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was contacted, they were aware that I had a top secret security clearance, which is obviously a requirement to do anything, and they were also aware that I had a solid financial background. I had a degree in finance, and I was working in the banking industry at the time. So that's really what they needed as what they call an asset. So I wasn't an employee. I was taken on as an asset, and I had a handler who was a CIA employee who was directing me for the things I was supposed to be doing.
Have you had any contact with those individuals since this all started?
No, not since they had me picked up in Canada and thrown in prison after I blew the whistle.
All right. So after that occurred, of course, Carolyn wrote a letter to our beloved Madam Secretary, who at the time, of course, was the First Lady of the United States. This letter was written to Mrs. Clinton February the 2nd, 1999, 19 years ago, quite a while. And you've titled it, "It Takes a Global Village," in part because Mrs. Clinton had just written a book called "It Takes a Village," which was all about her passion and care for children. And I'll read it if that's all right with you. It says, "Dear Mrs. Clinton, my name is Carolyn Wilfred, and I live in Stanford, Ontario, Canada.
Stratford.
Sorry, Stratford. I got to take this headset out of my ear so I'm not getting the echo. Stratford, Ontario,
The same place
Canada.
Justin Bieber is from.
Hey, I'm sure that made no difference whatsoever. He wasn't even born in 1999. As a Canadian woman, a wife, and a mother, I ask you to please read the following pages, including the attachment sent to the ACLU, containing the bizarre events which involve your justice system. Still a justice system that's under suspicion today. Members of your government, and 3 of your citizens whom I deeply love. 2 being innocent children who have been placed at extreme risk for almost a year now. These children, Danielle, who was 7 at the time of the letter in 1999, and Isaac, who was 5, are children born of my heart, the children of my new husband, Harmon Wilfred. I'm horrified that such injustices could happen in the civilized world, let alone the United States of America and Canada. In the summer of 1997, I met my husband-to-be as an international business associate while he was in Canada on an extended business trip from the U.S. Every night he was away, he phoned his children, Danielle and Isaac, to check on them, to tell them that he loved them, and to say goodnight. Those of us who were working with him could not help but share his pain and stress as we heard his children crying in the background, their mother striking them. And it's important that we point out that Harmon's previous wife was a child abuser. And she was striking the children and yelling at them and at Harmon on the phone, even denying him the right to speak with them by hanging up the phone mid-conversation. Dearna, their mother, Harmon's first wife, often complained that she could not handle the children and that Isaac would run around and bang his head against the walls in frustration. That's a very troubling sign. As an experienced former professional child care worker and a mother of 2 daughters, I was greatly disturbed by these events. The scenario continued for some time before Harmon filed for divorce and gained custody of his children. With my professional background, it was natural for Harmon to request and receive my assistance in helping the children adjust to their new environment. Sorry, I've lost my place in the document here. It was natural for Harmon to request a new environment and recover from their mother's abuse. From the first moment Danielle and Isaac came under my care, it was so very obvious that they had been living in an abusive situation. Danielle would hide under furniture and cry uncontrollably, confessing that her mother was very mean to her and that she was afraid of her. We would hold Danielle and rock her until she calmed down. Isaac, still not toilet trained at the age of 3.5, would scream when his diaper was changed, saying, "Please don't rub my face in it." So the boy was old enough to speak and made it apparent that his mother's method of toilet training him was what someone cruel might use with a dog. Ah, boy, that is hard to hear. Many times Isaac would tell you that he never wanted to see his mommy Dearna ever again. Day after day, they would express more evidence of abuse and thorough fear and anger over the way they had been treated while living with their mother. After a period of about 3 months of consistent reassurance and lots of love, Isaac was proudly toilet trained, and the episodes of fearfulness lessened. Yet both of them continually told us that they never wanted to go back to Colorado to their mother again and wanted to stay with us forever. They even expressed their desires to Harmon's neighbors, and in every instance, totally unsolicited. We finally had established a loving and secure home for them. During this process, I fell in love with Harmon and his children. Now, these children, of course, Harmon, you haven't seen. This letter is very, very old. You haven't seen them even still.
No, I haven't.
And is their mother still living? Do they have any relationship with her?
The last I heard, she was still living, and the last I heard, I had a couple of texts with my daughter Danielle about a year ago, and she was even then quite shy to communicate with me at all. She had said that she didn't have much of a relationship with her mother, that her mother wasn't very nice to her.
It's a really sad story. Let me continue with the letter here. So then, after 4 months of being an extended family, accompanied by a nanny and attaining such wonderful progress with the children, our lives were shattered as they were whisked away by the police and their mother, and Harmon was arrested and put in jail. The children's reaction on seeing their mother was not one of joy, but rather of fear. That's horrible. The nightmare had just begun for all of us. A loving family was torn apart. I pray that you can imagine the emotions of pain, fear, anger, and helplessness that take over the body, mind, and heart during such events. I never imagined that a year later, we would still be living the nightmare that our children would continue to be forced by the authorities to live in an abusive environment against their will. And I'm sure you certainly never imagined that 19 years later, you'd be living the same nightmare. Mm. We have neither seen nor spoken to our children, nor have we been informed of their whereabouts throughout this entire ordeal. Even now, we're shocked that the U.S. and Canadian authorities involved refuse to show any interest whatsoever in ever checking on their welfare and safety, in spite of our extensive efforts to enforce basic fathers' rights. Attached is an account of the bizarre events which occurred before the following legalized abduction of our children and Harmon's arrest. It appalls me as a Canadian to think that lives, especially those of children, can be so violated with little or no concern for their well-being in the civilized international community, where one is assumed guilty until proven rich, where it is difficult to convince anyone to listen to the truth and act accordingly, especially where innocent children are involved. Where are the righteous? Where are the people in power who care? Will no one help and be responsible for innocent children unless they are paid? And I do want to point out to the audience, by no means are you destitute. The two of you have mounted a substantial legal campaign, so it's one of these rare cases where even having money doesn't seem to get you justice in this, quote-unquote legal system.
What happened after this is I went to my father and begged him, and I was in tears. My mother was in tears. My mother was my greatest supporter. She was the one who convinced my father to help me. Otherwise, I don't think he would have. And my father lent us, if you can believe this, $400,000. We went through 13 attorneys in the U.S., and Harmon never made it into a courtroom to challenge the charges, to challenge the abuse of the children, to get custody of his children back. They refused to allow him into a courtroom, even to the point at one point in time they hid him in an elevator shaft so he would miss his hearing. It's the most unbelievable story, but we've lived it, and it's all true. And yeah, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy beyond tragedies.
There was Carolyn is beginning to hint at this now, but there was an overarching influence around, there was a cloud around this whole situation. Your audience might wonder, well, gee, what was going on? You had the children. What was going on with your ex-wife, Irna? How was all that working? Well, at the moment that the children were picked up, and believe me, their nanny was out. Carolyn's daughter was actually being the nanny for us at the time. She was out had the kids in a wagon and was walking them on their usual walk around the blocks around the house there. And a white van pulled up. Guys in bulletproof vests jumped out, grabbed the kids, grabbed the wagon, grabbed the nanny, threw it all in the back of the van, and took off.
With the mother there, and when Dirna showed up, the children hid behind my daughter. And my daughter basically said, "You are not taking these children without me." So the dog and my daughter and the police and the mother and everything went in the van to the police station.
Wow.
Now you have to ask yourself, what caused something like that? Well, we were so shocked because after I picked up the children and filed for divorce on the basis of child abuse because I wanted to protect my children,
right.
And then I had them with me, I was in the process of working through a professional mediator to mediate the terms of the divorce in terms of custody and and property and so on, and the terms were 50-50, and it was trying to work things out and make sure that the children would be safe and so on. So we were going through a pretty normal process when this happened. So we were wondering, where the heck did that come from? And you'll see more of that as we go through this with the CIA and the things that I was doing and the influence of the U.S. Justice Department and my having blown the whistle, and all of those things began to interfere with the normalcy of life. I mean, if you can say that divorce is a normalcy, I mean, these things do happen. And so there was an influence in this that came out ultimately of the Clinton administration and some of their threats and promises that were involved in this that influenced this to a degree that was unbelievable, that what they put my children through. But anyway, carry on.
When Harmon was first arrested, we were in total shock. I'm surprised that my hair didn't go fully gray and fall out. I've never experienced anything like that before. They came to the door in flak jackets with guns. They said that Dearna had told them that Harmon had wives all over the world, which of course was not true. Yeah. They took the children. Harmon kept saying, but you're putting the children back to child abuse. It doesn't matter. We were told to arrest you. Why are you arresting me? You have no charges. We've just been told to arrest you. His rights were not read, nothing. They just took him away and put him in jail. I went into total shock. And it took us a while, really, to figure out. We couldn't figure out why this was happening, because everything that we were doing seemed to be a normal sort of divorce process where you go through, 50-50 custody, 50-50 split on almost nothing because he almost had nothing. But yeah, it took us a while to figure out that this was political retribution and that the Clintons were behind it. So continue on. Sorry.
It's hard to conceive of a circumstance in a normal divorce proceeding where the police would get involved. Of course, unless there's domestic violence, divorce is a civil matter. This was in the United States or in Canada?
This was in Canada.
Well, this was in Canada. They came over from the United States and apparently put this order to have me arrested. But the amazing thing was when they took me to court for the first, of course, when you're thrown in jail, then you're set up with a court appearance. Mm-hmm. I went into a court appearance, and I looked around because it was very strange. The judge then, they had grabbed my briefcase, which had the documents in it that I was working with, the highly secret documents that I was working with the CIA. They then discovered that I was in the middle of these billion-dollar deals, and the media started rolling. I mean, you could imagine. And then they tried to accuse me of having abducted my children, which was absolutely not true. I was their father, and I had the full right to have them with me.
Well, and we had
tried to make it look like a kidnapping. Well. But you could imagine, on an international level between two countries like that, if I had abducted my children, the media would have had a field day with that, especially as I was involved with things around the CIA. But immediately the judge, when we all stepped into the courtroom, kicked all the media out, and he said, there's a media ban on this. The media will not touch this. And the media ban remained on it as they began the whole process of trying to determine exactly what I'd done wrong. And it took them over 60 days to even come up with charges that came over the border that they had to concoct through my family court circumstances.
That's what I wanted to ask. Give me 1 second.
Strange.
Because I'm not very familiar with Canadian law at all. Is that typical for the police in Canada to just arrest you with no charges and not tell you what the charges are?
No. In fact, the police sergeant that arrested me, when he first arrested me, he was very cautious. He thought I was going to be armed. He'd been told some horrible things about me. After I was in jail for a while, and he was then called in to be a witness on how I had responded and so on, he actually came and visited me in the jail.
Wow.
And when I finally got out on bail, we spent some time together, and he said, my God, none of this is true. So he went in to witness on my behalf, and they had him on the witness list. They took him off the witness list. They didn't want him to speak to anybody.
Wow.
And the interesting thing too is
to keep the charade going.
Harmon had a $600,000 bail for violation of a custody order. Have you ever heard anything so bizarre in your life?
It's crazy. Obviously, yeah. No one has heard anything so bizarre because there is nothing more bizarre that I'm aware of. Let's continue with the letter for a moment here.
And ultimately came across the border with a charge of extortion. And we kept saying extortion. What the heck did I extort? Well, as it turned out, the custody arrangement that we were negotiating between us with the professional mediator was 50% custody, 50% property. So you could hardly call that extortion. But they said that the professional mediator assisted in extorting her to get what I wanted, and that they had arrested him as well, which is what proved
Wow.
the extortion. Well, as it turned out, we found out later they had not arrested him. He had no idea any of that was going on. This was all being stated, by the way, in the Canadian court.
They lied in court.
They lied to the court. The U.S. Justice Department lied to the court. 3 weeks later, the mediator was arrested for what they said he needed to be arrested for. He was extorting something out of Deerna, that was supposed to be custody and property. But then he challenged it, and a month later they dropped the charges. But in the process of that, because this charge was on the books, they actually admitted they approved my extradition, and I had to file for an appeal, and that's when I finally got out on bail and started gathering my documents together. But the only reason I got out on bail was because Carolyn convinced her mother and father that I was innocent, and especially her mother. Her mother more or less blackmailed her father into coming up with his name on the bail certificate for the $600,000, of which the U.S. thought I'd never come up with that. They thought I'd remain in jail and they'd get me across the border. Well, he got me out, and when I got out, the U.S. was in trouble, because then I started putting all my documentation together to show that I not only hadn't done any of that, but that I had, in the process, I had figured out what they were doing, was blowing the whistle, and so I began to put my evidence together, and that's when ultimately they sent the president's attorney, Gregory Craig, up to Toronto to meet with me through their attorney to beg me, to ask me to please back off, because President Clinton personally was involved in this deal, and that there wasn't anything I could do about it. In fact, he even made the comment to me, "What do you want me to do, Harmon? Get them all fired?" And I said, "Absolutely. What they did is wrong." And he said, "Well, of course it's wrong. They're corrupt. They've always been corrupt. It's been that way for decades."
The Clinton's own lawyer said that?
Gregory Craig said that, yes.
In a private meeting in a hotel in Toronto. Yep. Yeah. And he said, "But there's nothing we can do about it."
It was Janet Reno and Madeleine Albright who signed on, who got the extradition through.
I mean,
they
imagine
tried to
getting
get
an
it through
extradition
the first time, and it didn't go through, so they pushed it through the second time.
Let me continue with the letter.
The initial
one,
they tried to do a standard extradition, which didn't require all the signatures.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
when they
Let me carry on, because there's more here, I
got,
think,
oh,
that's
sorry,
going to shock people. Okay. So attached, we're back to Carolyn's words here. Attached is really just the beginning of an account of bizarre events which occurred before and following the legalized abduction of our children and Harmon's arrest.
Right.
It appalls me as a Canadian to think lives, especially those of children, can be so violated with little or no concern for their well-being. In the civilized international community, where one is assumed guilty until proven rich, where it's difficult to convince anyone or listen to the truth and act accordingly, especially where innocent children are involved. Where are the righteous? I read this part already, I'm sorry. Where are the people
you go to I am
care?
impressed.
Right. And will no one help and be responsible for the innocent children unless they are paid? I am impressed by your book, It Takes a Village. At the time, you were impressed by it. Yes, we are all responsible for the welfare of those who cannot defend themselves. But how many of us in the international community actually take that responsibility and risk and do something? And that's the other thing that we really need to thank you for, Harmon, taking that responsibility and that risk and suffering the penalty.
It's been amazing.
There are 2 children involved in this particular situation and in this global scenario. Someone of power and influence must rise up and protect these 2 innocent ones. The village must be global. The global elders must be there for even these 2 children, as all children are the future of this planet, a place that is in desperate need of loving, compassionate, caring, parental leaders to right the wrongdoings. My husband is a very responsible father. I have never seen a more devoted and loving father, reassuringly and lovingly guiding his children through life's challenges. I've learned much from him, for his teachings and support come from his heart and his love for his children. I'm asking you, please be an elder with us in helping us rescue these children. You and I have been fortunate to have had loving families, and Harmon and I would like to continue this tradition for our children. We need your assistance and support from your global village. I believe that when you read the attached document, you will be incensed at the incredible political and judicial corruption that surrounds the events that led up to these children being put at such inconceivable risk. You then must see how important it is that strong action be taken quickly to right this atrocious wrong and to bring these children to safety immediately. In your husband's recent State of the Union address, you received a standing ovation for your work with children's issues in the United States. I too applaud your book and your efforts. Won't you please extend those efforts internationally and respond to a Canadian mother's request for these two children, awaiting your reply, Carolyn Wilfred. And Carolyn, can you tell us what that reply was?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We sent out emails and letters and faxes to the vice president at that time, which was Al Gore and Tipper Gore. Mm-hmm. We sent to senators, congressmen, even to the Colorado Department of Child Services, and I heard back from them where they basically said, I'm sorry, but we cannot intervene, which to me was just like, your children in social services. We're telling you about abuse, and you're telling me that you can't intervene or that you will not intervene. And under normal circumstances, they would go into the home and assess the children and remove the children if they were being abused. They were obviously being influenced, and unfortunately, at the time of this letter, I believe that Hillary Clinton was an upstanding woman. Now I think
Sorry, we lost you there.
I don't want to say it on the air.
I lost you.
I'm not afraid to say it. She was involved in it.
She was involved in it, and she is a horrible, horrible, horrible person who has no interest in family except her own, and no interest in children except her own. She refused to stand up for the rights of these children. These children suffered for the past 20 years. It has had a detrimental effect on them. And I say shame, shame, shame on the Clintons. Just shame on them. I can't shame them enough. If I could shame them all the way to hell, I would.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me to see this letter that you wrote, of course, in 1999 at a time when, like you, I think so many people thought the Clintons were great. You know, president, first lady, she's writing books and making speeches about children and helping them and all this kind of stuff that we all now know is nonsense. We're basically now writing books about what happened and blaming everybody else, but nobody seems to be writing a book about what happened to Harmon. And that's what we're doing here today. So the next thing I'd like to do is, we have another letter that you wrote to Mr. Harper, who was the Prime Minister of Canada at the time. This was Stephen Harper. The thing that's so remarkable about this is that this letter was written July 8th, 2009, fully 10 and a half years after the first letter. No response whatsoever from the Clintons. They didn't have you up on stage at a re-election campaign. They didn't use you as a political football to push some agenda. They just continued to suppress evidence and manufacture charges
and ignore.
Talk to me a little bit about, before we go into this letter, talk to me a bit about the things that happened to you, Harmon, in between the time the letter was written and what prompted Carolyn perhaps to write this Oh Canada letter. Weren't you thrown in a prison in Canada or something like that?
Well, I think that's what I alluded to earlier, is that when I was picked up in Canada and thrown in prison, I was moved around. Well, ultimately I was out on bail for a while. I was told to stop it or I'd lose my children. Ultimately, I gave in to the extradition only because I had to get back to Colorado and attend to my children. I had to see them. I had to know what was going on. I had to know and I had to get back to the whole divorce situation, because by that point in time, the divorce had been completed, and I wanted to make sure that the children are all right. So I got an attorney out of Colorado who took on the case. He looked at the case and couldn't believe it. He actually said to us, "This could not happen in the United States of America," and yet he was looking at the transcripts and the rest of it and said, "But it did." So he said, "You get your butt down here, set aside the extradition." So I went to my Canadian attorney and I said, "Look, I'm willing to set the extradition aside, allow myself to be extradited on the basis that I can come down there under my own steam, face the family court, as well as get these charges dismissed, because ultimately the charges were useless. So I wanted to go before the court, get the charges dismissed, which was the not showing up for a custody order, which I didn't even know about, and this extortion, which was ridiculous, because by that time my so-called co-extortion person, the mediator, had been dismissed, so there wasn't any extortion. So I went to get the charges dismissed, and I went to attend to the family court around my children to find out what was going on. Upon my arrival, I was arrested. Well, actually, that's not true. I went to the Canadian police to set everything up so that I could leave. I was rearrested in Canada. I mean, the reason I'm a little confused about that is because this happened twice. I ended up getting back to Canada, and then I went down and got arrested again. But
wow.
Anyway, I cut a deal. I went to the Canadian police to arrange everything. I was rearrested in Canada by the Canadian police, put back into prison, and then because I had set aside my extradition, I was extradited on an airplane, several actually, with belly chains, handcuffs, and leg irons in a jumpsuit.
Wow.
Now imagine that. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not an axe murderer. I haven't done any international gun running, anything like that. But this is what you call the diesel therapy, to scare you to death and to get you to completely give over. But yeah, they put me in an airplane. At the time, we still had contact with a couple of my CIA friends who were friendly towards me, and so a friend of mine who got a hold of them found out what the itinerary was. So Carolyn, being the brave woman and amazing woman that she is, grabbed a bag, dragged it with her, went to the airport, found out what planes I was. She got on those planes with me, and the federal marshals who were accompanying me on either side of me in these belly chains and handcuffs kept looking and saying, "What the hell is your wife doing here? How could she know what airplane we were on? Who gave her the schedule?" Well, we got off that plane in Chicago, we changed planes, and she shows up again on the plane. Ultimately, we ended up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, but at one point, these officers, because she kept walking by and trying to say hello to me and talk to me and let me know that she was there trying to support me, these officers said, "If she comes by here again, we're going to arrest her." And I kept thinking, oh, God, somehow tell Carolyn to stay away, because I don't want her arrested as well. They were so upset that she knew what our itinerary was, but we ended up in Colorado. And that's where they put me in jail.
What was amazing with that is I walked right by him, and I swear it was God. I swear it was God. God blinded me, because I didn't even see him. I didn't. Yeah. If I had seen him, I would have looked over and they would have arrested me. But I did not even see him, and I walked right by him.
When I got to Colorado, they not only would not let me in a court to actually confront the family court charges and get all this stuff removed, but they put there's 2 times that I was sent back here, but I'm going to try to do this in one throw here. Out of the 2 times I went back, I actually got arrested by the federal marshals and taken to federal court on other unrelated charges, which was against the UN Hague Commission Treaty for extradition. You cannot be extradited on one charge and then have other nefarious charges put against you when you get into the country you're being extradited to. That's unlawful. They put me in federal prison, and in that 3 weeks, my attorneys actually filed against it as a violation of the Hague Commission Treaty between the 2 countries, got me out. A federal judge then had to seal the file to avoid a diplomatic incident, let me go, and I made it back to Canada. But
and that's another story where he had to represent himself. Oh, that's another bizarre story.
Now, you told us in a previous conversation, Harmon, that you were locked in an underground prison. This seems
that was in Canada.
Extremely draconian. Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
In fact, the federal marshals that picked me up out of the underground prison in Canada actually said to me when they picked me up to take me to Colorado to put me in federal prison, they said to me, "I have never seen anything so grungy, grimy, horrible as this. He said, we didn't realize this was here. You're going to think you've gone to a 10-star hotel in the U.S. when we put you in federal prison. This place, how in God's name does this even exist? That's what the federal marshal said to me when they got me out of the hellhole in Canada.
What was the living condition like in that prison? Were you in a cell?
It was a cell that was probably about 40 feet by 20 feet.
Pretty large.
It had six. It was a communal cell. It had about 6 double. No, let's see. 12 double bunk beds. So there was like 24 beds. But at any one point in time, there was up to 40 to 50 guys in there. So you didn't have a bed. You had to sleep on the concrete floor. The place was a tomb. Concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling, and open toilets, open shower.
So you had to use the bathroom in front of 40 other people.
Oh, of course, yes, of course.
And were you attacked by any of these people?
Oh, the place was, the emotion in there was from ballistic anger to deep depression. I found myself sitting against the wall in a corner, doing the best I could to just cope and try to keep my head down. Don't look at anybody. And everybody in the place, they would sell cigarettes out of the commissary to all these guys every Wednesday. And every Wednesday, the place all week was loaded with cigarette smoke. The ventilation was horrible, so the smoke just hung in the air. And even though I didn't smoke, I was sucking in this cigarette smoke all day long every day. Ultimately, I begged the guards to let me out and let me do some work outside the cell because they could tell. And some of the guards said to me, "Look, what the hell are you doing in here? I mean, we're talking about guys who are in there for attempted murder, gun and international gun smuggling. I mean, some really high-level stuff." And the guy asked me once, "Why are you in here?" And I said, "I violated a custody order, apparently." He said, "What?" So the guards felt sorry for me and finally got me into the laundry room so I could work during the day in the laundry room for 12 hours. And I reorganized that and ordered things for it. And then ultimately they got me in the kitchen so I could work 12-hour shifts in the kitchen and get out of the smoke.
Well, it's good to hear at least the guards were civil, but it sounds like an amazingly terrible ordeal.
Wow.
It was a bizarre place.
There was drugs going on in there too.
And the amount of drug running in the place, it was like a crack house. I mean, and some of the guards were involved in it. They were literally bringing drugs in, giving it to the inmates, smuggling the drugs in, and the inmates would, well, I don't know if I should say this on a live video, but they were doing what they call hooping it. They were putting it in plastic gloved fingers, tying it up, and sticking it up their rear end so that they couldn't be caught with it.
Right. I believe they call that keistering in the United States.
Well, they call it hooping in Canada.
And when he was in there, his life was threatened many times because he wouldn't become involved with the drugs.
Wouldn't participate in the drugs.
He wouldn't participate in smoking. They had a
who
TV
threatened
on
your life? The guards or the inmates?
Wrestling channel, and yeah, it was horrible.
The wrestling channel sounds like the least bad part. But who was threatening? Who was threatening you with the drugs?
It was the noise. Imagine being in a concrete box with a TV on full on for like 10, 12 hours a day. The way it echoed in that place, it was just tormenting.
Nothing about it sounds good. Was it the guards or the inmates that were threatening you to do things with drugs?
Say again?
Guards or inmates were threatening you relative to drugs?
Both. Both. Guards very surreptitiously, but inmates absolutely.
Wow.
They had little pencils, and they said Harmon told me they had these little stubby pencils, and the inmates would say, "Look, if you rat on us, we're gonna, while you're sleeping at night, we're gonna take this pencil, put it in your ear, and shove it into your brain."
Wow. And there's no reason to doubt that they wouldn't do that. It was a
horrendous place.
Carolyn, were you ever able to visit Harmon there?
Yeah. You allowed to visit him 3 times a week.
You went to visit him 3 times a week?
I was allowed to visit him 3 times a week at the beginning for 15 minutes each time. And the guards got used to me, so sometimes they let me stay longer, even up to an hour. And yeah, coming from my background, and here I am in a maximum security prison, on the phone, hand on the glass, crying, people, there were, I think, 4 metal stools. Everything was attached to the floor. People sitting beside me with, you know, which I wasn't used to, with tattoos and piercings and everything, swearing like crazy. And I realized, I mean, this journey has been a huge learning curve.
Right.
I realized that these people, it didn't matter what background they came from. It didn't matter what they looked like. They were suffering just as much as I was suffering, except they expressed it in different ways. And yeah, it was humanity just at the worst, really. It really was.
They would, when she came to visit, the guard would come down and get me. They would take me out of this underground tunnel up these stairs to ground level, and she was in a ground level blockhouse, which is where the visitors place was. And there was a row of, you've seen this in a lot of prisons, there was a row of really thick glass-plated windows there, and she had to pick up a phone, and I had to pick up a phone, and we had to talk to each other through the glass plate.
Wow, amazing. It sounds absolutely horrible. So let's go back to this letter to Prime Minister Harper. So this letter, of course, was written, Carolyn, you wrote this in 2009, and it's an open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada at that time, who I understand was not the son of Fidel Castro.
Doesn't.
So you write, Dear Prime Minister Harper, my name is Carolyn Dare Wilfred, and I don't know if we've addressed this directly, but of course, Carolyn, you are an heiress to the Dare food dynasty, which is a very large company in Canada, on par with Nabisco or something like that, doing about $300 or $350 million per year in revenue.
And an heiress on paper, of which I am trying to get it into the material world.
That's a story
that'll
perhaps
come,
for
that'll
another
come
day.
Later. That's another story.
Right.
Yeah, but yes, I am. Yes, I've been very blessed to. I was adopted into that family at the age of 2. I've been very blessed to be in that family. I've had many, many opportunities that I would not have had if I hadn't been adopted into that family. I have 2 older brothers. I'm very, very different from the rest of my family. My mother, as I said, was an angel in my life. She was my advocate. My father was German, very, very, very controlling. Right. He was very, very high influencing person in the Canadian world, and I'm sure in the Canadian government.
And I can only imagine that this type of situation where someone in his family was being prosecuted and going to jail, not something that he was super enthusiastic about.
No, it was a social embarrassment. Nobody wanted to know the background of it. Nobody asked me, gee, can we be helpful? Nobody said, gee, can you tell us your side of the story?
Right.
It was. I
imagine it put tremendous pressure on your marriage and other aspects of your personal life as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had to choose, and because I knew right from the very moment I met Harmon that we were meant to be together. My family, at one point in time, my father and my brothers offered to buy me a house in Canada and give me a salary, a decent salary, certainly nothing what they were making, but a decent salary compared to the average Canadian. If I would divorce Harmon, leave him and leave New Zealand and come back to Canada. And basically I said, no, money doesn't buy love. I have met a man who loves me unconditionally like I have never known before. I'm not going to do that. And if I had even thought of doing that, I would constantly be under their control for the rest of my life. And I was really tired of being controlled. I mean, I'm 66 now. I don't want to be controlled anymore.
Well, you're an incredible woman, Carolyn. I don't think very many people would do what you've done. And of course, you're writing to Prime Minister Harper. You let him know you're a member of the Dare Foods family of Kitchener, Ontario, and I have finally had enough. It is with great sadness and frustration that I write this open letter to you and the citizens of Canada. I was raised to believe in my country, be responsible for my wrongdoings, help others in need, and stand up for what is right. not knowing that my government supports what amounts to financial extortion by the Canadian Revenue Authority, which I presume is essentially the Canadian IRS, right? Okay.
Yes.
And refuses to be held accountable to the UN Human Rights Commission for illegal acts and human rights violations in cooperation with the United States is a very tragic day indeed, not just for me, but for all Canadian citizens who may at some point in time find themselves being terrorized by our own government agencies. Some say that if you are wealthy, you receive justice, but this is just not true. My husband, Harmon Wilfred, and I have been trying to receive justice for over 11 years. And remember, this letter is from 2009, so we're working on 20 plus years. The horrific events that have befallen us continue to do so, and we truly have had enough. All of this because my husband told the truth and blew the whistle on the many wrongdoings of various U.S. and Canadian government officials and their covert agencies. We now continue to live with the political retributions from both countries. Because of his selfless act, his children were taken from him and placed back into child abuse unjustly. It's really an unheard of situation. He was arrested unjustly. He was put into a maximum security prison unjustly. He's been disallowed any contact with his children for over 11 years unjustly. His human rights were horribly violated in a Canadian underground prison unjustly. And you told me in a previous conversation that prison has since been closed, I presume, because people agreed it was a horrendous place.
They built a mega prison just out of Toronto, so they closed that prison, filled it in, and built condos over it.
And can I ask you, does the same unacceptable situation exist in Canada where private corporations own prisons?
I'm not aware of that.
I'm not sure of that.
I know they do in the U.S., but I'm not aware of that.
We'll have to look into that further. We now continue to live with the political retributions because of your selfless act. Children for 11 years, blah, 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 blah. So, okay.
We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right,
well, we were finally forced out of Canada. That's where you left off. We were finally forced out of Canada.
We were finally forced out of
No,
Canada in fear for our lives by the cooperative actions of Canada and the covert agencies of the United States, unjustly. And we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in the state, provincial, and federal court systems in Canada and the U.S. to try to receive justice, and yet have not. My husband's human rights case, and you've got that linked in this document, which we will provide to the crowdsourced community after the interview is done. Your case was accepted by the UN Human Rights Commission against Canada in December 2007 and remains under consideration, including evidence against the U.S. of tortious and gross human rights violations included as part of the foundation of our evidence against Canada. And does that remain under consideration, Harmon?
Yes, it does.
To this day.
As I say, it's under what you call a judicial review right now because they refuse to do anything with it, and so we're waiting for them to do something. But of course, they're doing nothing. As long as we can't challenge it, it just sits there. But it's still alive.
And Canada had 6 months to respond to this. The normal process is the country that you have sued for human rights violations has 6 months to respond. They're supposed to respond in 6 months. Canada never responded.
12 years.
In fact, after 6 months, I filed for a summary judgment, which is normal when a person doesn't respond to a case. And when the summary judgment was being considered, that's when the U.S. came in and forced the case to be dismissed, because the U.S. was still in the body of it and they didn't want to see it go forward. So instead of allowing that to continue, we immediately asked for a judicial review saying, no, you can't do that because the U.S. does not have authority to make the case go away. They're not a defendant. And that's where the case is now.
Hopefully my friend Larry Klayman is watching this interview and will take some interest in what's gone on. The only reason that the U.S. is not also a formal defendant in this case is that the U.S. government has refused to accept the competency of the UN Human Rights Commission to take a case against them. And yet they're a member of the United Nations. So now, isn't Saudi Arabia somehow involved in the UN Human Rights Commission? I think they're the chair of it.
I've heard that in recent times, yes.
And we know what kind of human rights atrocities they engage in if you happen to be a woman.
Well, maybe here's their
person.
chance to show here's their chance to show what they've got. Step forward, Saudi Arabia, and make this case happen.
It's my sincere hope that you don't have to rely on the generosity of Saudi Arabia to find justice.
Yeah,
I agree.
So you wait again for justice, and to this day you're waiting.
And that statement is a quote that the U.S. government refused to accept the competency of the UN Human Rights Commission. That's a quote from the U.S. government.
That's crazy,
right.
For sure.
That's on record.
Having lived a rather protected and very blessed life, it certainly came as a huge shock to me to discover the inner and hidden evils of my country. The underground hellhole maximum security prison in Cambridge, Ontario that my husband was thrown into for 4 months was not something I could have imagined, nor could I even understand its existence. He was crammed into a small, open-toileted, cold, damp, and filthy cell with many angry, depressed, abused, and overly stressed men. He was not allowed to lie down and rest during the day and was only allowed outside to see the light of day for a short breath of fresh air less than a dozen times during those 4 months. It was an aggressive, 24-hour, cigarette smoke-filled, illegal, drug-infested, life-threatening, and tormenting concrete tomb that to this day has had a detrimental effect on him and me. Dear God, the Humane Society treats its animals better than those people were treated, and Canada claims to be a civilized and humane country. What I saw and what my husband personally experienced was far from humane. It was an abomination. It still disgusts me to think that such a violation of human life was going on right there in my own country, in my own province, in my own backyard, to my own husband, and in cooperation with the political retribution of the United States of America. Oh, Canada. Hillary Clinton once said, "It takes a village to raise a child." And yet, when I urgently cried out to her for help to save my husband's 2 minor children from being placed back into the arms of a recorded child abusive mother by the Canadian authorities without question, no one listened or did anything to investigate the situation or help in any way. And that's actually something I intended to bring up earlier when we were reading the first letter. It's important that everyone remember you weren't begging for her help to release Harmon. You were begging for her help to help the children who had nothing to do with this.
It was
Exactly
always
right.
about the children. It was
always
always
first
about
and
the children.
foremost.
Because children were innocent victims in this.
Yes.
I mean, to take 2 children and to put them back into a situation like that, you have to do everything that you can to free them.
Yeah.
The
It's
children
quite
were
disgusting
pawns.
to see
No
how
other way
they
of
were
putting
used
it.
as pawns. Exactly what I was
That's
going
right.
to say. Very upsetting. I think anyone... See, this is intriguing to me, Harmon, because we always come to these cases where even if someone feels like you did something wrong by revealing information about the CIA, even if people feel like you were totally in the wrong and deserve to be treated like an axe murderer and put in a prison that could have had long-term detrimental or permanent effects on your health, your mental well-being, etc. Even if someone thinks that, which I can't imagine, how can they possibly justify your children being penalized as a result? It's really terrible. So Hillary said that, you cried out, and nobody did anything. We wrote urgent letters to Bill and Hillary Clinton, Al and Tipper Gore, congressmen, senators, federal and state child services, the Canadian Justice Department, the Hague Commission, and other relevant agencies for assistance, not just for us, but for Harmon's helpless minor children. Caught up in this government retribution, we begged and begged and begged the authorities to investigate this blatant and reckless action, but we either got no replies or were told it wasn't in anyone's jurisdiction. In the end, the answer from everyone brought us to the shocking conclusion: what the U.S. wants, the U.S. gets, without question. Well, Mrs. Clinton, your global village has failed miserably to raise and protect our children, even though you received a detailed letter from me during your husband's presidency in February of 1999 entitled "It Takes a Global Village," begging for your help. I again entreat Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the U.S. and Canadian governments to practice what you preach for the sake of all children. This global village has purposely ignored Harmon's children and this horrible injustice. And the political retribution continues against all who stand up for what is right in the face of government corruption, torture, and abuse. That's a very important sentence right there. In order to cover her tracks and attempt to eliminate our cry for help, Canada has now done another unthinkable act. On February 13th, 2009, the Canadian Revenue Authority froze all my Canadian assets and funds in what I believe is an obvious and flagrant effort to discredit and stop me from financially supporting my husband in his UN human rights case against Canada. The CRA have continued to justify this action in their enforcement order and subsequent dismissal of our legal objection dated June 12, 2009, by citing facts and circumstances involving my husband's UN case against Canada, as well as an unprecedented retroactive reassessment of my then lawfully permitted 2001 tax strategy. Harmon and I departed North America in June of 2001 under duress for fear of further violations of his personal safety and freedom at the hands of the Canadian and U.S. governments. My tax planning at the time, necessitated and designed around our urgent relocation offshore, was completed by Alberta tax attorney Richard DeVries under the advice of prominent Canadian legal and accounting consultants Fraser Milner and BDO Dunwoody. In this latest action by the CRA, I believe Canada is deliberately avoiding taking responsibility for what they've done in cooperation with the U.S. by attempting to eliminate my financial effort to expose this travesty. When any government believes they have the right to retroactively change the law in order to make a legal act illegal after the fact, and then they seize all of your money so you cannot afford to defend yourself, no one is safe. I don't think we can.
I'll just interject. Out of all the people who did the tax strategy that I was involved in at the same time, I was the only one that had the funds.
All of her assets frozen.
Frozen, thank you.
Well, clearly they identified that you had money and were mounting a legal defense, and they came up with a strategy, no matter how ridiculous and illegal it was, that they just took the money.
Yeah.
Well, something to point out, Jason, is that when Canada thought they'd gotten out of the case, by the UN coming around and dismissing it on the US's request, within 30 days of that dismissal having taken place, or I should say, once it got dismissed, and I filed for a judicial review, and to reopen to keep the case going, within 30 days of filing for the judicial review, keeping Canada on the hot seat, is when the CRA stepped in, the Canadian CRA stepped in, and froze all of her assets. That's no coincidence.
Right. It's amazing. It's really astounding. So back to the letter here. This unprecedented and underhanded action must and will be challenged. I believe I am being bullied and deliberately blocked by my own country for supporting my husband on a compelling UN human rights complaint, which is nothing less than government-condoned extortion. At this point, because of the diabolical actions of the CRA, I'm afraid to return to Canada this month to visit my 91-year-old father, Carl M. Dare, for his birthday, because I'm advised that the CRA could require the seizure of my passport until the tax matter is resolved. Such an action would effectively separate me from my husband for the duration, as he is currently stateless in New Zealand and cannot travel until his rights are restored. And Carolyn, has something like that happened now?
Well, it's spilled from the United States to Canada to New Zealand, and now I have been banned from New Zealand. So yes, that has come to fruition.
They've managed, I say they, and you wonder who they is sometimes, but they've managed to accomplish what they wanted to get done, which is exactly what you see here, by getting, when she left for her, as I mentioned earlier, when she left to visit her daughter in September of 2015, and they were also told that she'd also then applied for permanent residency. She'd been here long enough, so her application was in. They said, well, we can't really respond to that until you're offshore. You can do that while you're offshore. Go ahead and go offshore and we'll work on it.
So they basically
she
lured
went
you
offshore,
into...
slammed the door behind her.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. New Zealand slammed the door behind her and gave us a letter saying that she wasn't allowed back, even to visit. And ultimately, they admitted the reason they did that was try to lure me offshore to get me out of New Zealand.
Now, just to digress for a moment, we've heard about this thing called the Five Eyes, which is the UK-USA agreement.
Yes.
And it's a multilateral agreement for cooperation in signals intelligence between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Now, 3 of the countries in this agreement seem to be among those persecuting you. So it's important that we talk about this and understand what the capabilities of our own government, working in coalition with these foreign governments to suppress the rights of citizens. I think all of us would agree that the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, these are all considered among the most free countries in the world. We expect, as citizens of any of these countries, that we have rights and protections against the government doing exactly what it is that they've done to you. But this Five Eyes intelligence community is something that I've only recently heard about. I don't think I was aware of this before 2016, that whole situation with Kim.com, who's also in New Zealand, made me first aware of this Five Eyes community. Do you have any information in regard to that, Harmon? Have you dealt with Five Eyes outside of your own experience, or were you educated in the...
No, I haven't dealt with it directly, but it's clear. I mean, when I became aware of the whole Five Eyes thing, it doesn't surprise me at all that all of this is connected. I mean, think about it. They named 3 out of the 5 countries that are part of the Five Eyes. Are they cooperating with each other? Of course they are. Is this a cooperative effort? Yes. Is it a conspiratorial, what's the word? A collusive effort? Of course it is. Of course it is.
They're almost acting as one
They're doing
unit.
Yes.
Oh yeah. They're doing their best to get me offshore so they can get their hands on me. And then the question becomes, well, why don't they just go ahead and take me the way it is? I don't think New Zealand could stand the embarrassment of it now that it's all so exposed. So they're trying to lure me off by my own volition to get me to leave, so that then they can get me in the international waters, if you will, or international airspace, so they can take with me and do with me whatever they want. I'm not going to give them that chance, nor is Carolyn.
It's a really shocking situation. I want to continue with
I mean,
this
honestly, I would rather be separated from him and be a Skype wife than have him dead because of their... I mean, they've tried to make him do something illegal, and we've been told that if he steps outside of New Zealand, that he will probably be killed or placed under circumstances. What do they call it? Rendition? What do they call it? Where they take you and they hide you.
Put you back in one of those underground prisons.
Yeah,
so the question that you pose is, when will the political retribution stop? When will this long overdue nightmare stop? When will our tears stop? When will the children be restored to their father? When will the truth be recognized, investigated, and prevailed? Who will have the courage to right the wrongs, O Canada? Mr. Harper, it's about time that you and Canada take a stand and do what is right. For the sake of all your citizens, this is a democratic society, and I want to be proud of my country and the principles I've been taught all of my life, under which Canada represented to the world. Oh, Canada, rise up and show that you are the true North, strong and free, and set a good example. The abuse of political power is no different from domestic violence or even terrorism, except it's on a national scale, and it's institutionalized in your case.
Yeah.
You are in the
Right.
highest position of responsibility to protect the people of Canada, so you must do your part to keep our land glorious and free. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo the necessities to support it. That is a quote from Thomas Paine, American patriot. We'll never give up hope or stop fighting until justice and righteousness are served. Please stop this shame on Canada's good name. In the meantime, we're doing the best we can to peacefully reside and operate our New Zealand-based global IT business and contribute back to the New Zealand community in the tradition of the Dare family through our local charitable trust. And we should let people know that these organizations are dismantled, so they shouldn't attempt to send
That's
money
right.
to them or anything like that.
That's
No,
right.
no.
Between the earthquakes and all the horror that we've been through, we sold one and had to shut the other one down.
Harmon renounced his U.S. citizenship in 2005 with good legal advice in order to preserve his personal safety and freedom, as well as being thoroughly disgusted with his country and the treatment of his family. He remains stateless and unable to lawfully work or travel until New Zealand finally recognizes his human rights and grants him citizenship. He has never been convicted of any crime nor done anything wrong to deserve this governmental abuse and neglect. I'm currently waiting for my New Zealand residency, so I will not be separated from my husband, and we can continue to reside, do business, and contribute to this beautiful country while we wait for someone in the towers of international and global authority to do what is right. And of course, you continue to wait for that day here 9 years after writing this letter. And did Mr. Harper respond at all to this?
No. And what I didn't realize at the time of writing this, that he was, I don't want to sound crude, but he was up the butt of the Clintons.
Right.
So he was definitely in their pockets doing their bidding.
Right. I think we've seen a lot of
Now
things
we
that
did
people
get a
maybe-
response. We did get a response from the Minister of Revenue on this, and that's on my website. And even
Right.
that was unacceptable. We
Oh,
wrote back a
it's
rebuttal
pathetic.
to that, saying you've got to be kidding
It
me.
was
I mean, they
pathetic.
didn't recognize anything that they've
No.
done wrong, of course.
Well,
And we
of
should
course
thank you-
of course they wouldn't.
Thank you for reminding me. We should let everyone know that they can visit your website. It's harmonwilfred.com. And you've also got a website with a lot of legal documents and the interview that we did with Charles Ortel just about a week ago. And that is called Lumina Diem. And that's LUMINADIEM.com. And that means illuminate the day. So people can learn
Light
everything
of
about
day,
your
that's right.
case. People can learn everything about your case by going to these two websites, and it is a fascinating case. It's really astounding, I think, for people who live in either of these countries, any of these countries. There's so many countries involved in your persecution at this point. Now, there were some other things that you also wanted us to take a look at here. What would you like to discuss in the rest of this outline, Harmon?
Well, you've covered. Scroll through the outline here.
And we'll include
I
this in
think-
the description on YouTube so that people can download this document.
Stop
and-
there.
Stop there. Yeah.
Stop there. Let me just narrate this for a moment.
Sure.
You've done such a good job. I can't. Well, your picture's in front of the copy, so I'm going to read it from my copy. You may ask, and obviously this is me talking, but what did Harmon do for the family court to justify the permanent removal of his children and his rights as a father, completely revoked with no contact whatsoever? Now, there are several points to be made here, and they're shocking points that it's hardly believable until you actually go into the system and look at the transcripts. I've got all the transcripts for this. I can prove every bit of it. It's unbelievable. Number one, Harmon's 2 divorces and custody orders in both 1990 and 1998 were forced without legal representation. I was incarcerated for both hearings. Imagine a hearing going on while you're in jail, and they go ahead with it anyway without you having any representation. That's a human rights violation by itself, on the basis that Harmon believes in the gifts of the Spirit of praying in tongues and interpretation of tongues. They got that out of me during the first hearing. He talks to God and believes that God talks to him. Now, as I say that, there's nothing abnormal about that in the Pentecostal, the charismatic, the evangelical religious circles nowadays. In fact, well, I'll tell you in a moment that even Vice President Pence has been confronted by that lately. So
Well,
I wasn't doing anything abnormal.
Harmon, that's just a fancy lawyer way of saying that you pray to God and your religious beliefs hold that God hears you and answers those prayers in the way that God does. And I think many people believe that. Disparaging you for believing in God and praying to God seems like a violation of your rights to freedom of religion.
Even Oprah believes in that.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, my first wife, who filed for divorce, she actually used this as a reason why she was filing divorce, that I was crazy, and she was afraid that I was going to do something to hurt her, and I've never done anything to hurt her. He talks to God and believes God talks to him. Now, the judge who was involved in that, Judge Joyce Steinhardt, who was the head judge for the 18th Judicial District in Colorado, is quite a religious lady in the Presbyterian religion, and she at the time didn't believe in the prayer in tongues. In fact, I was told later off the side that she thought it was of the devil, and that didn't surprise me based on the result we got. And number two, in the first divorce judgment in 1990, and that was Judge Steinhardt, in spite of the fact that the court had Harmon, and the judge did this, examined by a licensed psychologist and a psychiatrist while incarcerated during the trial, and was found mentally sound by these professionals, Judge Joyce Steinhardt stated that she considered Harmon unstable from a layman's point of view. The judge literally mocked Harmon in the courtroom with the question, day after day until the trial was over, she put me in jail, Mr. Wilfred, what has Jesus told you to do today?
It's really quite shocking.
Which it was hard to answer a question. Oh, yeah. Now, here's what you've got up on the screen. Joy Behar's attack on Vice President Pence, I couldn't help but notice that in the last few days, but this is coming up. She said, it says, it's one thing to talk to Jesus, it's another thing when Jesus talks to you. That's called mental illness, if I'm not correct hearing voices. This is exactly what the judge accused me of in this first divorce hearing. And so she literally took away, well, let me read the next. Therefore, the judge ordered that Harmon must voluntarily submit himself, this was part of the judgment, by the way, to a psychiatric institution for at least 1 year for his parental rights to be restored. He did not. I didn't do that, but sued the court for violation of his civil rights unsuccessfly. This decision set a precedent, and there's a link in there where you can actually look at the suit and see the things that I filed the suit for. This is in number 3 there, Jason. Number 4, this same precedent. Now try to imagine this was used to take away my son in 1990. In 1998, when my wife at the time, who's now my ex-wife, decided to finish the divorce while I was in jail in Canada, while Canada was holding me in jail, she took advantage of the situation. Of course she did, and allowed all of the information from my first divorce to be brought into my second divorce, and they used that same decision and that same precedent. This same precedent was used to revoke my parental rights with my subsequent 2 children in 1998, the ones who were taken out of Canada and put back into child abuse, even though there continued to be no evidence to support the decision. Quite the contrary, I was trying to tell the court that she was a child abuser, but the court wouldn't hear any of that evidence, couldn't, because I was in jail in Canada. He was unlawfully being held in a Canadian prison by order of the U.S. Justice Department during his divorce. Again, another trial with no legal representation. These human rights violations against Harmon and his children are included in his UN petition 1638/2007, filed and accepted in 2007 from New Zealand. And that's the human rights petition that you showed earlier.
Now, Harmon, some of the comments here
And then there's a
on
section here.
Periscope are saying that the state attorney general should be forced to reopen this case. I think that's a good point. Where can people,
Absolutely.
who should they be tweeting at? What state? Colorado?
Colorado, that's right. But unfortunately, now here's the catch. The guy who was I'd blown the whistle on a guy while I was in Colorado, who was the district attorney for a pension fund, and I made some enemies there. Well, by the time this stuff occurred, he became the state attorney general for Colorado. Imagine that. He since served 2 terms as state attorney general. His name is John Suthers, and he's now the mayor of Colorado Springs. So he still holds a lot of power in Colorado. So when I tried to get attorneys to reopen the case over the years, when they found out John Suthers was involved, they said, we won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. That guy has all the power in that state. So it's a good old
That's why we went through 13 attorneys.
Oh, wow.
Every time they came to John Suthers or they came to the Clintons, they quit the case. They left.
Unbelievable.
And then we ran out of money.
They were bullied off the cases.
My father said, when we went back to Canada, he said, I'm not giving you a penny more because obviously you're not getting anywhere.
Wow.
And they're just going to bleed you dry. So that's why we had to leave the country.
Wow. Wow. So, Harmon, what's happening with your case now? Really, the interview we did last week, you said, was the first time that anyone even wanted to interview you to make this information public. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. We've been trying and trying, and you guys, between you and Charles Ortel, you guys have been a godsend to help us get this out to the public.
It's my pleasure.
I mean, I've got in here under epilogue, May 30th, 2000, due to the Hague Commission extradition treaty being violated by Canada as a result of the U.S. and state and federal authorities. The U.S. federal judge was forced to drop all the charges against me, release me from jail, and seal the file to avoid a diplomatic incident. Then we tried to file a complaint with the Canadian Justice Department. They wouldn't hear it. They basically said, well, they let you go, so what difference does it make? And so that's all documented and listed on my website. Then we filed a petition with the UN in 2007. I've already given you the result of that. And then the human rights that have been violated are Article 6, Article 7, Article 9, Article 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 26. If you read that and you see the documented evidence that's there, that's absolutely, there's no speculation in that at all. It's all documented. It'll blow your mind.
Right.
I mean,
the situation really is mind-blowing, because I think that most people who would watch what we're doing right now would think that this could never happen, but this is your life. You've been living this for the past 20 years. So it's really a shocking situation.
I want you to imagine something now, and this is for the audience. Imagine this. Imagine with all this going on around us, it's like a tornado swirling around us. And Carolyn is now trying to sell her shares, get away from the Dare family, and she owns 1/3 of the Dare company, or nearly 1/3. So she has the right to by the shareholder agreement. The brothers wouldn't have it. They've gotten in the way of that, so she filed an oppression case. She lost the oppression case, and now that's on appeal, which is coming up on March the 8th. But imagine these brothers utilizing this information in court, saying she's married a crazy man. Nobody's defended us. Nobody stood up for us. And so they go in and they utilize all this information. They submit all this information to the court when she's trying to say that this is a simple oppression case where they've been keeping her oppressed, trying to keep her from getting money out of the family trust, out of the family company. All these things are going on, and all this is documented on the website. And so we've done some public press releases to try to bring this to bear, but the boys have used this. They're delighting in the fact that we can't get any help from anybody, and that I'm looking like a nutcase.
Well,
what
they've tried to do is to financially oppress me, to force me to be separated from my husband.
That's terrible.
It's worked.
Yeah, which has worked because in that Financial Post press release, believe me, I do not live like an heiress at all. My brothers live very, very well, have lots and lots of money, and they have kept me under their thumbs financially ever since the beginning. Ever since
They've spent years paying themselves dividends and using a separate company to pay themselves dividends while they pay Carolyn no dividends in the millions.
I wonder
And
if
that's
people
called
in
financial.
Canada.
That's called shareholder oppression, by the way, which is why she filed an oppression case.
Wow, I wonder if people in Canada might consider
And
that
all the
the
time,
next
all the
time they go to
while,
buy cookies.
yeah. Well, all the while they've been
Looking at
holding
historic
since 1975. They've had an offshore family trust that wasn't recorded, and since 2000, that's been unlawful. And
Whoa.
I mean, the Paradise Papers picked that up and printed some information on it. And if you
Now, wait
look
a
in
minute.
the Dare Family part of
The
this,
Dare Food Company was in the Paradise Papers?
yes,
absolutely,
my father
the Dare
was.
family.
Hmm.
There's a press release that I released on July.
Wow, so wait a minute.
July
Let me
19th.
stop you for a second.
Yeah.
That links them kind of to the Clintons, doesn't it?
Of course it does.
Wow.
Well,
I should say, of course it can. Of course there's that opportunity. Absolutely.
my father was a very, very powerful and influential man, and very secretive. So God knows who he was involved with, what he was involved with, but yeah.
Wow.
It's a question.
We've
It's a
got
question.
King James in the Periscope comments, and he's an avid follower of Canadian news and a patriotic Canadian, and he's, I can tell he's interested in what this information means, what the implications of that are. Well, we've been going for about 90 minutes here, guys, and I think there's plenty more for us to discuss. Harmon, I think I want to investigate going to the United Nations building and seeing if there's someone at the Human Rights Council that I can speak with about your case and ask them why they haven't done anything, or possibly is it, who's the UN ambassador? Is it Nikki Haley, or who's the U.S. ambassador to the UN?
U.S. ambassador is Nikki Haley. I'd love to talk to Nikki. In fact, if she ever sat in front of me and looked me in the eye, she'd know that I'm genuine. But the difficulty you're going to run into is the Human Rights Commission is not in New York. It's in Geneva.
Oh, well, I guess I can't do that. Also, they'd probably beat me up and throw me in a van, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The Indian attorney that Harmon had representing him, and God bless him, he did a lot of it for next to nothing. He was accosted, and he was accosted in the airport, and his computer and his briefcase and everything was taken.
Wow.
So
they took his passport and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an amazing story.
Now, just
yes.
If you wanted to wrap it up, I just want you to read the very last bit of that, or maybe I can read it.
Please do.
The appeal hearing on my oppression case against my brothers is set for March the 8th, 2018. I ask everyone for prayer around this. I've never been greedy. I just want it to be fair. I just want to be free of this oppression, just free of the control. I am very concerned about any possible Canadian government or Dare family influence with the original decision that may also prejudice the appeal court decision. Because what we've noticed through Harmon's court decisions in New Zealand, as well as my court decisions in Canada, and my daughter had a court decision, that they appeared to be influenced by either the government or my family, because when the court decision was going on and in the morning, and we thought everything was going really, really well, it seemed fine, the judge went for lunch, and all of a sudden the whole demeanor of the courtroom and the judge changed, and it was like, what is going on here? So something, I mean, of course you can never prove it, but something definitely was going on, because you could see and you could feel the change.
There is a prejudice, and that prejudice is based on based on my background, what I've done, and the fact that these people do not want Carolyn to come into her rightful money based on her shares, because if she does, they know they're in trouble.
Right.
They know that she can get some legal things going with that kind of money that'll really make a difference. So she's been held back for years in getting her shares and getting the money out of her
And
shares.
my father
the judge
once,
walked
my
in
father,
from lunch, wiping
Oh,
dinner
yeah.
crackers from his mouth.
yeah. My father once told my daughter that because she supported me that she was tainted. So
Wow.
that says a lot. That says a lot.
It's a sad story that you guys tell, but I'm hopeful that we can help you make the ending a little bit happier. I want to thank both of you. We've got Harmon and Carolyn Wilfred with us here tonight, and it's a stunning story. We will be speaking with you guys in the future. I want to thank you for coming forward, and we're going to continue as a community to do whatever we can to help you. I
And
hope you
thank
both.
you for your courage, really.
Yeah.
You're for stepping up
compared to you
and
guys.
bringing this into the light. We can't thank you enough, really.
And Jason, once you're done, once you come up with a video, I'll be posting the video on my luminadm.com, a documentary website, along with the outline for the video, which
Yes.
we've tried to cover it all, but it's just taken too much time. So you have to go through, click on those links, and look at the documented evidence. I have not said anything here today, nor has Carolyn, that it isn't documented, doesn't have court records for it, and cannot be proven. Everything that we've told you is the truth, and that's the key to the whole thing.
It's a very compelling story, Harmon. Thank you both, and we will speak to you again soon. I want to thank everyone for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.